company has been convicted first in New York 10 years ago and last year in France for false advertising. It's not biodegradable, it's not good for the environment. And I have an interview of a scientist in France who made a study which showed that Roundup leads to the first steps of cancer. It's very important to understand that because 90% of the GMOs grown in the fields belong to Monsanto. And 70% of the GMOs grown in the world have been manipulated to resist Roundup. The kern of my investigation is what is called the principle of substantial equivalence. What does it mean? It means it's a principle that a GMO is supposed to be similar to its conventional counterpart. This principle of substantial equivalence was not based on any scientific data. And the person who tells it in front of my camera is not everyone. I mean, it's James Mariansky, who used to be the chief of biotechnology in the FDA. And he recognized that this principle wasn't based on any scientific data. It was based on a political decision taken by the White House to push biotechnology in the world.
Yeah, and I would say, quite frankly, we have no complaint about the way USDA is handling it. They're going through an orderly process. They're making sure that as they deal with these new things, they do them properly. And now, if we're waiting until September and we don't have our authorization, we may say something different.
Call me. We're in a dereg business.
Recently, we lost 60 ducks and geese. They took a few steps, and then they fell down, dead as doornails. They spray deadly herbicide over there. And when it rains, the water streams down here, and since ducks live in water, that's the result.
In Paraguay, 70% of the farmland is owned by only 2% of the population. With GMOs, the concentration is increasing. 3/4 of the soybean producers are foreigners staking claims for this new green gold. The ban on animal-based feed after the mad cow epidemic and the recent biofuel craze have caused soy prices to soar, triggering a rush to Roundup-ready crops. According to the last census in Paraguay, each year 100,000 people leave rural areas to live in urban slums. An estimated 70% flee Monsanto's genetically modified soybeans, which are destined to feed Europe's chickens, cows, and pigs.
We are
going to talk about the production model of GM soybeans promoted by Monsanto. It's a true multinational company. It's everywhere in the world. Its objective is to control all of the world's food production through farmerless farming. The result is that Monsanto is depriving us of our food sovereignty, of our ability to feed ourselves without depending on anyone else. That is why we say that we must fight for our independence, for our land. We must defend our communities, our families, and our country.
In my case, my family lives in the city, but I don't want to go there. In the city, you have to buy everything, even food. Here, whatever we grow is ours. We can eat whatever we want, but in the city, you can't. If you don't have money, you have to search for food in garbage cans.
I'd like to add that these families' struggle to survive touches all of us. In 2007, Monsanto employed 18,000 workers in 50 countries. In 2007, its stock prices continue to rise, and its profits have reached $1 billion. Its shareholders include not only pension funds and banks, but also hundreds of thousands of small investors.
Many restrictions on pesticide use in Western nations are to protect the health of farm workers who apply or are exposed to the chemicals. Wherever we filmed in the Third World, we saw no protective clothing or masks or any of the other safeguards required in our part of the world.
How were you poisoned?
We stayed here and we were spraying the cotton. One gets poisoned.
What happens to a person who is poisoned when spraying?
They have to run to the doctor. If it is serious, they can die.
Large areas of Vietnam were deforested by the U.S. military using Monsanto's Agent Orange. The toxic herbicide reportedly caused over 50,000 birth defects, as well as hundreds of thousands of cancers in Vietnamese civilians and soldiers, and in former American troops serving in Southeast Asia. Unlike the Vietnamese victims, U.S. Vietnam veterans exposed to Agent Orange were able to sue Monsanto for causing their illnesses. Monsanto settled out of court, paying $80 million in damages, but it never admitted guilt.
The pesticide accident, our top story tonight.
State agricultural investigators say it was the worst case of pesticide poisoning of farm workers ever in our state.
77 people have been treated so far for exposure.
One after another, these farm workers fell ill. They all came here to the Ruskin Medical Center.
Within a half hour, this small clinic was overwhelmed.
The first wave of migrant workers from Goodson Farm hit the Ruskin Health Center about 12:30 this afternoon, complaining of nausea, cramps, and breathing problems.
Health officials at Ruskin, who have been testing those affected, say a report from California on phosgene poisoning shows that the pesticide does cause long-term health problems.
Doctors say these farm workers shouldn't have been allowed to return to the field so quickly after spraying. Robert Vasquez says the need for money will require him to report for work in the morning. Dave Wagner, News Center 10.
Something happened in 1940 which marked the beginning of a new era, the era of the ability to synthesize and create on an unlimited scale new chemicals that had never existed before in the world.
And using the magic of research, oil companies compete with each other in taking the petroleum molecule apart and rearranging it into, well, you name it.
So suddenly, it became possible to produce any new chemicals, synthetic chemicals, the likes of which had never existed before in the world, for any purpose and at virtually no cost.
Fabrics, toothbrushes, tires, insecticides, cosmetics, weed killers, a whole galaxy of things to make a better life on Earth.
For instance, if you wanted to go to a chemist and say, look, I want to have a chemical, say a pesticide, which will persist throughout the food chain, and I don't want it to have to renew it very, very often. I'd like it to be relatively non-destructible. And then he'd put two benzene molecules on the blackboard and add a chlorine here and a chlorine that, and that was DDT.
When the 8th Army needed Jap civilians to help them out in our occupation, they called on native doctors to administer DDT under the supervision of our men to stem a potential typhus epidemic. Dusting like this goes a long way in checking disease, and the laughs are them. Pardon our dust.
As the petrochemical era grew and grew, warning signs emerged that some of these chemicals could pose hazards. The data initially were trivial, anecdotal, but gradually a body of data started accumulating to the extent that we now know that the synthetic chemicals which have permeated our workplace, our consumer products, our air, our water, produce cancer and also birth defects and some other toxic effects.